when white plays e4, and black responds in kind with e5. Knight f3 is white's most popular continuation, but some players prefer to avoid facing the rock-solid Petrov defense after knight f6. The bishop's opening with bishop c4 and the Vienna game with knight c3 are two related openings that may steer the game toward less explored terrain. Let's begin our journey by first introducing the bishop's opening with bishop c4. This straightforward developing move increases the pressure against black's vulnerable f7 pawn. Knight c6 is a flexible response, frequently transposing into the Vienna game with knight c3, which we'll soon examine, or the Italian game after knight f3. In order to avoid a transposition, white can play d3, possibly preparing a double-edged pawn break with f4. Black may also play the symmetrical bishop c5. Knight f3 is a natural response, inviting the Italian game once again with knight c6. Bishop c5 also allows some creative alternatives, including queen g4, attacking the unprotected g7 pawn, when black can defend the pawn while counterattacking with queen f6, adding pressure against white's vulnerable f2 pawn. After knight c6, white can throw caution to the wind and transpose into the risky king's gambit with f4, a pawn break that is only possible as the knight is not blocking its path from f3. These are all interesting ideas to explore, but black's most common and direct response is knight f6, activating the knight while challenging white's central pawn. Knight c3 transposes into the Vienna game, so if white wants to avoid an immediate transposition, a natural response is d3, supporting the center while opening up a path for the dark-squared bishop. Knight c6 and bishop c5 are reasonable options, often transposing into the Italian game or a generally balanced position out of the bishop's opening. If black wants to challenge the bishop's opening directly, then a strong response is c6. Black takes advantage of the open c6 square, which is usually occupied by a knight when white plays the more popular knight f3 on the second move. This is a concrete choice, preparing to strike in the center with d5. If white decides to play the risky f4, not only can black play e takes f4, followed by d5, black can also strike in the center immediately with d5, placing white's center under serious pressure. In one high-profile game, Grandmaster Magnus Carlsen played the natural knight f3, centralizing the knight while adding pressure against black's center. His opponent, Grandmaster Fabiano Caruana, simply ignored the pressure and counterattacked white's center with the disruptive pawn break, d5. Relieving the tension with e takes d5 allows black to maintain a two-pawn center for the time being with c takes d5, opening up the c6 square for black's knight. Grandmaster Carlsen maintained the tension with the most popular response, bishop b3. It's important for black to avoid the tempting d takes e4. This looks like a strong choice, as d takes e4 allows black a favorable exchange of queens, and knight takes e5 simply loses a piece after queen a5 check, attacking the king and unprotected knight. Opening up the light-squared bishop's pressure against f7 should not be taken lightly, and black's careless pawn capture is punished by knight g5, intensifying the pressure against the weak f7 pawn when black does not have a satisfactory reply. Grandmaster Caruana demonstrated a strong plan for black by playing bishop b4 check. Moves such as bishop d2, allowing an exchange of bishops, or blocking with the knight are harmless options. White can gain a tempo against the bishop with c3. But this comes at a price. White's knight cannot use the c3 square to fight for central control. c3 is well met by bishop d6, supporting the center when black enjoys good central control. This concrete approach sets the stage for a fierce middle game struggle for greater central control and overall piece activity. Grandmaster Caruana strongly defended black's cause, defeating the world champion on his undefeated path to winning the 2014 Sinkfield Cup, starting with 7 straight victories against elite opposition. d3 is a solid, if not particularly challenging response for white. If white is willing to accept serious risk to create complications, then we may see d4. Known as the Urusov Gambit, white immediately confronts black's center. E takes d4 is black's best way to challenge this gambit, as knight takes e4, runs into trouble quickly after d takes e5. The e5 pawn restricts the insecure knight on e4's ability to retreat to safe squares, while also opening up the d-file for the queen. The aggressive bishop c5, joining the knight on e4 and attacking the f2 pawn, not only allows the powerful queen d5, White can also keep it simple with the disruptive bishop takes f7 check, preparing to meet king takes f7 with queen d5 check, forking the king and knight when black's position is falling apart. Instead of capturing white's pawn on e4, black's best response is capturing the d-pawn. If white plays queen takes d4, this is well met by knight c6, gaining a tempo against the queen. e5, attacking the knight, is well met by the counter-attacking strike d5, a resource well worth remembering. A more trying option is to simply develop with knight f3. White is gaining a lead in development, so black must remain alert. Two solid options for black is to play knight c6, transposing into the Scotch Gambit, or sharper lines from the Italian game if white plays c3. The disruptive bishop b4 check is also worth exploring, if black decides to boldly grab another pawn with knight takes e4. This is certainly possible, although it does create the exact type of position the Urusov Gambit player wants after queen takes d4. White regains one of the sacrificed pawns and attacks the vulnerable knight. A sensible response is knight f6. White enjoys a serious lead in development, so black is hoping to gain time by striking in the center with d5. White discourages this idea while continuing to rapidly develop with knight c3. Black can gain a tempo against the queen while focusing on development with knight c6, when white's queen swings to the king side with queen h4. In exchange for a pawn, white enjoys a dangerous lead in development. White is prepared to play bishop g5, followed by castling queenside. Black is objectively doing fine, although it may be unpleasant to defend against white's initiative in a practical game. One idea for black is to play bishop e7, intending to castle. Black may then prepare to challenge white's light-squared bishop with d6, followed by bishop e6. Black is more than willing to return the pawn in order to dull white's sharp attacking play. Rather than developing the bishop to c4 immediately, white may first decide to play knight c3. Entering the Vienna game, white remains flexible before deciding how to initiate kingside development. If black responds with the flexible knight c6, white has a variety of options to explore. Knight f3 transposes into the four knights game after knight f6, a safe, if not particularly ambitious way to continue. The aggressive f4, a move we will later explore without the knight on c6, is a risky decision as black can play e takes f4, transposing into a king's gambit with an especially unfavorable reputation. White will struggle to prove full compensation for the pawn. Preparing a kingside fianchetto with g3 is also worth exploring, but white's most popular choice is to play bishop c4. We can now see the relationship between the Vienna and bishop's opening, which can often transpose. This is a tricky move order because if black continues with the sensible developing move bishop c5, as Grandmaster Yu Yang-yi played in a blitz game, this allows white to seize the initiative with queen g4, as played by Grandmaster Hikaru Nakamura, immediately placing pressure against the unprotected g7 pawn. There simply isn't a convenient way to defend against this move. The weakening g6 was played in the game. In the tempting response queen f6, defending g7 while threatening the f2 pawn, turns out to be a serious mistake as white can play the powerful knight d5. White simply ignores black's threat as queen takes f2 check. King d1 is highly favorable for white. Notice that queen f1 is not checkmate, as bishop takes f1 would be a rude awakening. Knight takes c7 check is a big problem. The g7 pawn is still hanging, and knight h3 is ready to remind black that the queen is dangerously short of safe squares. Rather than playing bishop c5, allowing the annoying queen g4, black can develop the other knight with knight f6, adding pressure against the e4 pawn, so white sensibly supports the center with d3. Bishop c5 is a reasonable path to explore. Simple development with knight f3 leads to more quiet, maneuvering play. Former world champion Garry Kasparov, making a brief appearance out of retirement, played the more aggressive f4. He was able to build a dangerous attack down the f-file and defeated Grandmaster Caruana in a memorable blitz game. These are interesting options to explore, but black's most popular continuation is knight a5. Moving the knight to the edge of the board is generally not a good idea, but in this case black intends on collecting the bishop pair, removing white's dangerous light-squared bishop from the board. Trying to avoid this exchange with bishop b5 allows a6, followed by bishop a4 and b5, when black will collect white's bishop on b3. In response to knight a5, White sometimes plays bishop b3, preparing to respond to knight takes b3 with a takes b3, opening up the a-file for the rook. Another interesting option was played by Grandmaster Magnus Carlsen, knight g to e2. White decides to allow black to capture the bishop on the c4 square, which opens up the d-file for white's queen and increases the pressure over the d5 square, restricting black's desirable d5 pawn break. Developing the knight to e2 also allows white to prepare the future pawn break f4, preparing to open lines on the king side. Capturing the bishop immediately is a reasonable choice, but his opponent, Grandmaster Anish Giri, decided to delay this capture to focus on development with bishop c5, when both sides decided to castle. Black is waiting for white to make a decision on the queen side before capturing the bishop on c4. If white tries to delay this decision, black may prepare to strike in the center with c6 and d5. The world champion decided to grab space on the queen side and provoke an exchange of minor pieces with a4. White expands on the queen side while threatening to maintain the light-squared bishop with bishop a2. So Grandmaster Giri made the exchange knight takes c4, d takes c4. White's queenside structure as well as the b4 square has been weakened, but white enjoys newly opened squares on the d-file as well as a strong grip on the d5 square. Black fixed white's a-pawn in place with a5, when white activated his queen with queen d3, supporting the e4 and c4 pawns. Black supported the center and prepared to activate his light-squared bishop with d6, when white reinforced his queenside structure with b3, when both sides activated the queenside bishops with bishop e6 and bishop e3, creating tension between the dark-squared bishops. So black played the instructive maneuver knight d7, supporting the dark-squared bishop while preparing the pawn break f5. Grandmaster Giri was prepared to respond to the centralizing rook a to d1, with the thematic pawn break f5, preparing to open lines on the king side. White may consider e takes f5, but Grandmaster Carlsen decided to fight fire with fire by playing f4. This tension-filled middle game is roughly balanced, in which both sides enjoy reasonable chances. Knight c6 is a solid way to respond to the Vienna, but black's most popular response is knight f6, adding immediate pressure against white's center. White can prepare a kingside fianchetto with g3, when black may reply with bishop c5, or thanks to the knight on f6, strike in the center immediately with d5. White may decide to continue once again with bishop c4. Bishop c5 is one reasonable path to explore. Against the bishop's opening, we explored the strong idea c6, preparing to strike in the center with d5. In this position, if black decides to play c6, a desirable choice in the bishop's opening is actually less effective in the Vienna. White's knight on c3 helps control d5, and white has not spent a tempo on d3, so this move is well met by the central strike d4. E takes d4 allows queen takes d4. Notice knight c6 is not an option to challenge white's centralized queen, so white already enjoys an active game with preferable chances. Playing knight f6 on the second move allows black another interesting choice, the disruptive knight takes e4. Preparing to meet knight takes e4 with d5, forking the bishop and knight while achieving greater central control. White can play the disruptive, but ultimately dubious bishop takes f7 check, drawing black's king into the open with king takes f7, when after knight takes e4, black can energetically respond with d5, when black is taking over the center, and with it, the initiative. White's best move is likely to admit this was not a good decision with the passive knight g3. The aggressive queen f3 check is well met by king g8, when black's king cannot be easily exposed, so white will struggle against black's dominating center as well as the bishop pair. And if white tries to play even more aggressively with queen h5 check, forking the king and e5 pawn, black has the strong response g6, preparing to meet queen takes e5, attacking black's rook in the corner with the powerful response bishop h6, revealing the queen's protection of the rook, when the crushing rook e8 is simply too much for white to handle. Instead of playing the dubious bishop takes f7, white can play the aggressive queen h5, threatening checkmate on f7 while also attacking the unprotected e5 pawn. Black should defend against checkmate with knight d6, protecting f7 while attacking the light-squared bishop. White's safest option is queen takes e5, allowing an exchange of queens after queen e7, leading to roughly balanced play. But if white wants to provoke complications, then a tricky move is bishop b3. A solid response for black is to simply play bishop e7, preparing to meet queen takes e5 with kingside castling, when black shouldn't face any serious difficulties out of the opening. A sensible-looking, but not very good response is knight c6. White can punish this natural-looking move with a disruptive shot, knight b5, threatening knight d6 check, followed by checkmate on f7. If black tries to defend the f7 pawn with queen e7, this allows the unpleasant fork, knight takes c7 check. Black's best chance is to play g6, which is well met by queen f3, continuing to pressure the f7 pawn, so removing the guard with knight d6 is a serious threat. Black can defend against knight takes d6 with f5, grabbing space in the center and threatening to capture white's knight on b5. White once again renews the threat of checkmate on the newly weakened light squares with queen d5. We reach the so-called Frankenstein-Dracula variation when black plays queen e7, defending against checkmate, but allowing the fork knight takes c7 check. This does lead to some complications in which black may generate attacking chances, but objectively this is a dubious line for black to play, and probably should be reserved for the fictional Frankenstein and Dracula characters to battle it out against each other. When black plays knight f6 on the second move, white may consider the Vienna Gambit with f4. Unlike when black's knight was on c6, if black plays e takes f4, this is a poor decision as it surrenders the center, allowing white to seize the initiative with e5. Black's knight should retreat to its original square with knight g8, not exactly a good sign for black. Trying to pin the e5 pawn to white's king with queen e7 is well met by queen e2, unpinning the pawn, renewing the threat against the knight, with a tremendous position for white. In order to try to neutralize the Vienna Gambit, black should strike in the center with d5, intensifying the pressure in the center. If white decides to relieve the tension with e takes d5, this is not white's best option, especially if white is intending to win a pawn with f takes e5. Black can centralize the knight with knight takes d5. Black already enjoys an active position, and if white plays f takes e5, white's position can quickly become unpleasant after knight takes c3. No matter how white captures, let's say with b takes c3, black will respond in the same way, with the energetic queen h4 check. Since g3 would lose the rook after queen e4 check, forking the king and rook on h1. White's king is forced to reluctantly march forward to the e2 square. Black is prepared to rapidly develop with bishop g4 check, followed by knight c6, when black's pieces are coming to life with an excellent position. Against black's counterstrike, white's best response is f takes e5, attacking the knight on f6, and provoking the response knight takes e4. Exchanging knights favorably opens the d-file for black's queen. Developing the other knight with knight f3 has been white's most common choice, supporting the center and discouraging queen h4 check. One response is the solid bishop e7, preparing to castle kingside, followed by attacking white's center with f6. A more ambitious choice is bishop c5, slicing through white's weakened dark squares, provoking d4. White gains a tempo, but it also opens the e1 to a5 diagonal, allowing black to play bishop b4, pinning the knight on c3 when black is ready to strike in the center with c5, creating a sharp game in which black should welcome these complications. One tricky option to keep in mind is d3. This provocative move challenges black's knight while encouraging queen h4 check. Black's best way to neutralize this choice is by exchanging knights with knight takes c3, preparing to meet b takes c3 with the strong response d4, preventing white from supporting the exposed e5 pawn with another pawn, so e5 will remain a target for black. A less promising line is the tempting queen h4 check. It looks like white has simply blundered, since g3 allows knight takes g3, taking advantage of the pinned h-pawn. But the position suddenly becomes complicated after knight f3, attacking black's queen and preparing to meet queen h5, maintaining the pin against the h2 pawn, with knight takes d5. White's rook on h1 is hanging, but white is also threatening a fork with knight takes c7 check. The position is incredibly complicated, and white is by no means worse in these complications. One final move that should not be underestimated is queen f3, adding a second attacker against the knight while preparing kingside pressure. Black has no shortage of interesting ways to challenge this provocative queen move. Knight c6, attacking white's vulnerable e5 pawn, is a strong move to explore. Trading knights on c3 is also a reasonable option, when white may capture toward the center with b takes c3, or possibly play d takes c3. In this particular case, white is ready to play bishop f4, followed by sharpening the game with queenside castling. Another interesting idea worth exploring is to reinforce the knight with f5. We shouldn't casually move the f-pawn forward, but black is generally open to allowing e takes f6. When this is well met by knight takes f6, black may later take advantage of the open f-file by placing a rook on f8. Black's centralized knight is well supported by the pawns, so a sensible response is to challenge this knight with d3. Provoking the exchange knight takes c3, b takes c3. White would love to play d4, creating a central pawn chain while supporting the e5 pawn. This is a good moment for black to prevent white's idea by playing d4. In one instructive master-level encounter, white played queen g3, adding pressure against the g7 pawn, which discourages black's dark-squared bishop from entering the game. White is offering a pawn sacrifice on c3 in order to accelerate development, which black declines to accept for the moment, preferring to develop actively with knight c6. White decided to continue with the poisonous bishop e2. Bishop h5 check does not look like a serious threat, but if black decides to accept the pawn sacrifice with d takes c3, this was not a well-timed moment to grab a pawn, as this falls for the trap bishop h5 check, preparing to meet g6. With the crushing sacrifice bishop takes g6 check, h takes g6, queen takes g6 check, king e7 runs into bishop g5 check, and king d7 allows queen takes f5 check. Black's exposed king will not survive long. Instead of falling for the trap, bishop e2 is well met by bishop e6, defending the f7 square, so preparing a sacrifice with bishop h5 check no longer works after g6. White decided to improve the position of the bishop with bishop f3, adding pressure down the long light-squared diagonal, while clearing the e2 square for the knight. The battle lines start to become clear after queen d7. The queen enters the action, supporting the g7 pawn in case black wants to activate the dark-squared bishop. Black also signals queenside castling when the play may become quite sharp. White's knight entered the game with knight e2, adding pressure against the d4 pawn, so this is a good moment to play d takes c3. Knight takes c3 would run into bishop b4, pinning the knight, followed by queen d4, when white's position is under serious pressure. So white decided to activate the last minor piece with bishop e3. Castling immediately is a strong option for black, and in the game black preferred to first play knight b4, threatening a fork on c2, followed by centralizing the knight with knight d5. This creates a sharp position in which opposite side castling is likely, when white will use the open b-file, as well as the bishops to create pressure against the queen side. Black, on the other hand, will seek active chances on the king side, likely with rook g8, preparing g5. Black achieved exactly this attacking plan, and went on to win the game. The bishop's opening with bishop c4, or the Vienna game with knight c3, are both interesting ways to avoid involved opening theory after the more popular knight f3 on the second move. This opening can set the stage for relatively quiet, maneuvering struggles, or try to unleash sharp complications by offering gambit play. If black is unprepared, these lines can be quite dangerous to face, but a well-prepared player should expect mutual chances without any serious dangers to fear. Thanks for exploring these interesting sidelines, and best of luck the next time the Vienna or bishop's opening makes an appearance on your board, right here on chess.com.